Welcome to The Difference Engine, the show for tech founders, investors, and innovators.
I've got to say, I'm genuinely looking forward and excited about today's guest, who happens to be somebody that you and I have both worked with. We're talking about someone who's been right at the intersection of tech, leadership, and transformation for, well, pretty much as long as the grown-up tech industry has existed, certainly as long as you have been in it, Jono.
Yep, absolutely. Our guest today, brought to you in association with Boardwave, is Colin Tenwick. Now, Colin has one of those careers that reads like a what's what of the modern tech era. Today, his LinkedIn page says non-executive chair investor. But he started out in the early days of enterprise software, working with the likes of relational database supplier Ingres, rising quickly to lead its competitor Sybase, and open source OS pioneer Red Hat right across Europe.
But Colin didn't stop there. He went on to lead StepStone, turning it into one of Europe's first digital recruitment platforms before going on to chair Control Circle, a hybrid cloud computing business, exited to alternative networks, and then a UK listed business.
Yeah, you'd have thought we'd have had enough by this point, wouldn't you? But he went on to be a non-exec director of private equity and venture-backed companies such as the security specialist AVG. What I love about Colin's story is how he's navigated shifts from desktop software to SaaS, from web portals to communications businesses, from B2B to B2C, and kept finding new ways to make technology useful, not just flashy.
So right now we're going to dig into that and what it takes to stay adaptable in a world that reinvents itself every few years, or these days every few months, and how you build technology companies that last and those that others want to come in and buy.
So, Colin, I thought we'd start by sort of looking back, and we've both been in the IT industry a long time, and from your point of view, what have been the biggest changes in the IT industry in Europe in the 40 plus years you've been in it?
Well, what a question. Back then in the day, I remember people used to spend all their money on mainframes, and in fact, the thing that everybody enjoyed doing was showing you their mainframes, because that's where all their money had gone. So being paraded around what was equivalent now of a freezer factory. Clearly everything's changed, and we've been through massive changes in terms of where people spend their tech. It's gone from being essentially a niche part of a business to now core to the business, and the cost of getting involved in that clearly has changed significantly as well. I mean, it is actually, a core part of most companies now, infrastructure, a core part of their investment strategies and structures. Most businesses today are technology led, and we've seen every single wave from mainframe through to mini, through to cloud, through to et cetera, over the last 40 years. So huge change from being, I suppose, something that was an identifiable add-on to now it's core and central to pretty much every business.
Yeah, and it seems to have gone from, in that time, from being part of the economy to now being the economy. But there's really been some other change, I think, which was back in the 80s. It was very expensive and difficult to innovate in tech. The cost of entry was very high, but that's really not now the case.
No, and I think the pace of change and the ability for people and businesses to be agile is extreme. People used to work on multi-year paybacks, investments, programs. We're now talking about people iterating in real time, many versions, even in a single day, in terms of maximizing. So it's a very different environment that we're now working in.
I actually did a little bit of research on the start of your career, Colin. I believe the Communards were in the charts back in 1986, if you remember those guys.
I was too busy to focus on charts in those days.
Fair enough. But I also looked into who were the largest firms in 1986, tech firms. You'll be surprised to know these are quite familiar names. So IBM, the biggest, Microsoft, and check out their market cap, 777 million. I mean, if they don't make that in a month now, they'll be very annoyed with themselves. HP and Compaq, which is obviously one company these days and not quite what it was. But there's been a lot of change, and you'll notice that they're American companies. And your career path, the early part of it, you were managing US companies as they rolled out across Europe. So it gives you a very unique sort of viewpoint as to those two parts of the world and what they've got to do with tech. Any lessons from the early parts, those very early parts of your career, and that you went on to apply later in your career?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to get involved in some of those. In fact, I started my career with IBM actually as a graduate. But if you actually look, the discipline that those American businesses brought, extreme focus on performance, which enabled them to continue to scale and take market share. So the US businesses that came to Europe in those days were challengers. They were hugely ambitious. I mean, there's an argument that actually says those American businesses became more international than any other international business, but that was purely because they actually had a model which they wanted to implement globally, and that was a single model. And so what you found was that the US businesses were extremely focused on sales performance, extremely focused on fast growth, and extraordinarily, I think, performance orientated, which really was the sort of epitome of the 1980s. If you think about the way the 80s sort of evolved, they were formative times and things really which I think still stick with me. But I think a whole generation of people that evolved at that time.
There was a sort of downside to this, though. There was an awful lot of people who were going around with the title MD or CEO, Europe or UK, Europe, France, Germany, and of course the lie in all of that was that they weren't really CEOs as we would understand it. They were sales directors essentially, under a lot of pressure to deliver some pretty big and rising numbers.
Yeah, and I think whatever your title, you were a glorified sales and marketing director. Nothing wrong with that, and in fact, a lot of people, that was the way their careers developed and evolved, and they've been extraordinarily successful doing that with a number of different US-led businesses. But you're right, the broader spectrum of what I suppose being a CEO involves, you didn't get that experience unless you moved back to the US and became part of the mothership and experienced that.
But that is one of the secrets of your journey, was that there was a time when you had done that essentially sales leadership program right across Europe, and there was a sort of realization that maybe that's not enough. I want to be more interested in the job. There are many more functions in the job of a real CEO than in a sales director.
Yeah, and that really sort of was a realization. I think I was flying to San Francisco once a month for management meetings, and I was feeling, well, have you reached the peak? Have you reached the top of that mountain? And something in me said, well, actually, you looked across. It was like sort of looking across, say, yes, you've reached the peak, but you're on the wrong mountain, and there's another mountain over here. And so I did feel that it was an opportunity to sort of broaden those skills. And as a CEO, the whole breadth of what you're looking at as a CEO changes. You have responsibility for the entirety, finance, personnel, people, product, tech, marketing, etc., etc. And so that was something that I really wanted to explore in more depth, having observed some great people doing those roles. And so role models are very important in anybody's career, but I felt it was the right time to see whether I could find that opportunity.
I mean, that was, I think, after essentially you'd done your third pan-European sales leadership role, I think with Red Hat at that time, and I think from memory, the moment you stepped out of that sales leadership role into the CEO role was strangely with a company called StepStone. And it sort of was your stepping stone into the world of CEO leadership.
Yes, and an interesting one to say the least, because that then led to sort of another part of my career. I mean, StepStone, when I got involved, was in most people's views a bit of a dead dog. It had launched and been part of the .com boom. Had floated on the London market right at the top of the boom, had raised over £200 million of cash, and then spent it in about 18 months. And I initially went in there as a consultant to see, whether I would be interested. And within 3 hours, it became clear that the company had probably less than a month's worth of cash left on its current burn rate, and no plan actually to change. It was like a Ferrari going full pace into a brick wall, and I took that on. I mean, me and a couple of colleagues actually, we took that on crazily.
Yeah, crazy. It's sort of fascinating because you'd grown up with IBM, Ingres, Sybase, Red Hat. These were essentially software companies, and mostly enterprise software companies, and here you were convincing yourself that you could fix a recruitment platform.
Well, I mean, you've got to remember, Red Hat was another massive challenge because that was the first open source free software. So think about going from an enterprise software environment to suddenly you got free software. That raised all sorts of other interesting intellectual challenges.
Isn't there also a rumor that when you arrived at Red Hat, they actually weren't getting any revenue from software, that you were selling sort of merch, scooters and other things alike?
In the first year, whilst we were trying to figure out how we could turn this into something that was going to be commercially more scalable, it is absolutely true that in our catalogues we had T-shirts, cups, and mini scooters, and they were very good sellers.
I think that's fine. They say that I was with a Salesforce exec this week, and the joke that we've always been saying is that Salesforce is an events company with a software company tagged on the end. And sell what you can. I think it's fine.
So there you were with StepStone, and I presume that it was in such bad shape that sort of what followed was delisting, refinancing, laying loads of people off. Not the stuff you get out of bed for normally.
No, it was a one-on-one on corporate recovery in sort of on turbocharged, and fortunately we were able to persuade some of the larger investors to back us and put emergency finance in. We threw the UK into receivership. Unfortunately, that's never a nice thing to do. We ended up with a very small European business left, and then we started to rebuild that, and that took us a few years. Then the market came back after the .com crash. It became clear that we needed to have a more repeatable revenue stream rather than a pure transactional one. So we started investing in this crazy idea of actually would people pay monthly for some software, which was one of the first sort of software as a service type offerings in applicant tracking systems. And the company then grew and scaled successfully, and we were so successful that Axel Springer wanted to acquire us. In terms of the total transition from time we went through to the final sale was about 8 years. The first 2 or 3 years of that were very much stabilizing. Then we had 2 or 3 years of good growth, and then maturity. Yeah,
I guess at that point you'd sort of proven to the world of investment and private equity that you could get a business successfully back on the rails, and somebody must have approached you with another business which possibly wasn't in terribly good shape, and yet again was a long way away from those early days in enterprise software. I think that business was BookaTable.
It was interesting because I had a couple of options I was looking at, and this was VC backed. One of the things it did teach me actually in the end is don't confuse things you like doing as a hobby with business, because it doesn't always work out. Restaurants, fantastic. The margins in the restaurant industry are incredibly small, but here was a business which had raised a lot of money, had probably not used that to its best use in some of the earlier rounds, hadn't got the scaling that it needed. And so I got involved in that to try and get some momentum and growth in that business, which we were able to do. It needed to be part of a bigger group. And we were very fortunate that we were able to do a partnership deal with Michelin, which then ultimately led to the sale to Michelin. And Michelin had it as their core online booking platform. And then subsequently it was sold to TripAdvisor. But it was during that process that I said I'd give it a couple of years. I was starting to reach the point where being CEO, I've been a CEO then for 13 years or so. And I'm starting to see that actually there are some other things that I thought I could lend my hand to and be more interesting.
And that jump was what, to Control Circle?
That was to my first sort of NED roles. So I became non-exec chair of Control Circle. Again, great company, UK company. Needed to be part of a bigger group, and alternative networks was looking to consolidate the space and was able to acquire the business. So that was just over a year and a bit in that.
You also joined AVG, which was a pretty sexy security company at the time. I think they listed on NYSE about a year after you joined, and eventually sold to Avast for well over $1 billion in 2016, and Avast are actually PE owned.
AVG was interesting. The company was in a great space. It brought together a lot of the things that I'd done in the past. If you think about it, it was a freemium model, so that played to the Red Hat side. It was also in the enterprise side. So it was very much B2B2C type model in many respects. Very international, and so we were able to scale that business. The board had some very strong players on it. We had the chairman of Rabobank on there. We had the CEO of O2, some very big PE players as well. And so it was a really interesting board in terms of talking about strategy development and then really sort of focused on execution. So I used to thoroughly enjoy that company, but it's also where I found that I was enjoying more working with the CEO and the management team rather than being the lead up front. It's taking that step back and working with the team and through the team, and that's where I found that very, very enjoyable, but also fulfilling.
It looked by that time that you'd sort of cracked the code, and what followed, listeners, if you're not familiar with Colin's career, was a whole series of European non-exec chairman roles at Pixel, Addison Lee, Voucher, Intelligent Reach. So this is about working with private equity owners and navigating the companies through a series of acquisitions, sales, IPOs, and of course this massively changing landscape over 15 years. And Colin, can you just finish this section by telling us a little bit about the two companies that you're involved in currently? So
I'm involved in two businesses, which again, technology is core to what they do. They are technology-enabled businesses. One is Oxford International Education Group, and that was a really interesting, like all these things, like, why are you attracted to a particular business? To me, it fits really three things. One is the CEO and leadership. Are they people that you really would value working with and you think you can add value? The second is the sector, and the third one is the backer. Typically, they're the three things I look at. Oxford International Education has the most amazing CEO, and she is an absolute natural force of nature in terms of what she's doing with this business. Education sector is one which is core. It's clearly very relevant. I think it's actually one where Britain has an enormous high value. It's a global brand which we can extend and further, and it's about making people's lives better. Education is their starting point, and so bringing technology to this is critical. And I looked at the space and I felt there was a lot of players in there which were not as fast moving, adopting technology at the pace in which it needs to. And so there's an opportunity there. And Oxford International is demonstrating that being a leader in this space, it's the fastest growing international education provider, broadening its skills. So to the point now we're actually also running our own universities, or running universities on behalf of universities in India and Canada and Australia. So a really interesting business, but one where a lot of the techniques that we've used in tech, we can now apply. A lot of the ways we look at scaling a business can apply. And then there are certain ones that just don't apply to that sector. And that's the alchemy that we try to bring together. The second one is Comify, which is a telecoms platform, messaging platform, international again, and one where essentially, communication messaging, whether it's via SMS, text, WhatsApp, anything that enables businesses to be able to communicate with their customers effectively or have a dialogue, improving the productivity, but actually managing that through all these complex networks with the major network operators. That's what Comify does. And so again, very different, but it's a big scale up opportunity.
You were a serial executive and now a non-executive chair. So what is it that any aspiring technology chair should know about the role? And what do you think is the most important function that a chair performs in ensuring that a company delivers for its shareholders?
It's a great question, and the way you get there will change depending on the circumstances. But fundamentally, your job is to deliver or ensure that the company can deliver on the strategic plan and the expectations of the shareholders and the owners. But by doing that, by essentially encouraging management to fulfill their ambition and fulfill their best alternatives, and make sure that the resources are in place, whether they're financial, technical, or whatever, to actually deliver that. So you're very much ensuring that both sides, the operational side and, if you like, the strategic side, the financial side, are aligned, but also making sure that as much as possible that you're able to also steer through some of the issues, perhaps a bit further out than some of the operational management may be looking at. And so you've got to be able to dip into the strategic view and direction, and then also be able to tether that back to operational side. And that's where the magic really happens. I was very, very fortunate that Jan Stenberg, who's sadly no longer with us, but Jan, he was my chairman for over 8 years, and I still wonder, I still question sometimes, well, what would Jan think in this sort of thing? He was an incredibly challenging individual in terms of he put his finger on the key issue, was able to identify the key issue in a debate and discussion, was incredibly supportive of me and my management team at the same time, and was also well respected by our shareholders. And so he knew when to support, he knew when to encourage, but he also knew when to criticize. Somebody who really was an extraordinarily exceptional man, but also a fantastic chairman.
And I think somebody else, which in this case we've both had experience of, was somebody that you cannot have had a conversation with him and not remembered it. And that was Mitch Kurtzman, who's now a VC with Hummer Windblatt Venture Partners, is he not?
I mean, Mitch was one of those guys where when you had a discussion with him or met him, you couldn't help but be incredibly enthusiastic about the topic and and the way in which he presented it, and the way he sort of articulated it. I always thought the thing that always reminded me is a bit like he would encourage you such that you could be a couple of lemmings leaping over a cliff, and you could look at your colleague next to you and you say, I don't know where we're going, but I feel great. And and the great thing I found about Mitch was he was fantastic in front of customers and clients, but also observing him. What's important is you observe people for, and I certainly always do. I look and say, well, they've done that really, really well, or they've got that particular skill. Then it's about internalizing that and figuring out, are they things that you could use or not? And you've got to be authentic. And there are certain things that you just look at and say, well, I could never get away with that, or I could never do that, whatever. And there are other things or techniques you look at people and you think, actually, that may work for me. So that's also part of how do you continue to evolve and learn. You've got to be able to be observant, but also, I think, authentic.
The companies you've chaired in recent years, such as Addison Lee and the Oxford Education Group, seem to be proof that all companies are technology companies now. Given that, to what extent has your experience of the culture in the tech industry, and the tech industry does have a particular culture, influenced how you've performed as a chair? And on the flip side, what is it that you've learned that those more traditional industries, if anything, have got to teach those of us who have grown up in tech?
I think it's a great question, and it is an interesting one, because with experience, I think you learn, you can't go full Tonto tech in some of these businesses because it full Tonto, it just doesn't resonate. And so what you've got to do is you've got to pick the bits that we would use, let's say simple things like, cost of acquisition, lifetime values, churn data, all these sorts of budgeting, all these things which are the things that we assess and manage tech businesses today. Some of those are applicable, and some of those are just an anathema, foreign language.
Beyond understanding the technology, what lessons has all of this experience, do you think, brought you that you could maybe share with startup founders and scale-up CEOs who need to learn the most? They've got the most to learn.
The more senior people get in their organizations, actually, the lonelier it is. And we're in this perverse situation at the moment where socially we are more connected than ever before with our past, with their schoolmates or whatever, people having fleeting touch points. But as you move up your career, or your scale of the responsibility gets larger, that peer group actually gets smaller. And so tapping into where you can discuss your issues, your challenges in a safe environment is increasingly important. And I bring that when I chair a board, I bring that to the CEOs, because one of the loneliest jobs in the world is actually as a CEO. It is you are facing all those challenges across all those areas, and where do you get your mentorship from? Where do you get your peer group responses from? And so what we're seeing, I think, with Boardwave as an example, it's tapping into this demand and this requirement that people want to be able to learn from others. They want to stay relevant, but they also want to challenge their own thinking in a safe environment. And so I think that it is a wonderful way of bringing together all these things we've been talking about: experience, people that are coming at it from either a financial perspective or an operating perspective or an industrial perspective, and this melting pot and bringing it together. And I do think the alchemy of that coming together is part of what could be, the success of what we're trying to do here. Because as the world becomes increasingly tech focused, those divisions of, well, I'm in retail, or I'm in production, I'm in food, whatever, actually start to break down, because we have more consistent problems and issues, challenges, but also solutions than probably we ever have done.
So this is the part I've been looking forward to, because I think probably one of the great values that you can bring of 40 years in the tech industry, Colin, to all listeners, is that you've recruited a hell of a lot of people. Could you please share with us what it is, in your opinion, that make future leaders stand out, and what can you do, or what can one do to encourage their development?
I think one of the most important things that I'd learned is a successful team, and team being the operative word there, brings by its very nature a whole range of different skill sets and different personalities. And actually some of the highest performing teams I've been involved with, on the face of it, you look at it and say, this shouldn't work because these people are bringing different things. But it's how you bring that team together and how you have a common purpose and common focus, and then recognize that those different people bring totally different skill sets to the table, which makes the actual solution that you're trying to get to better informed, better debated, but ultimately better implemented. So the first thing is I would say be cautious and careful about recruiting in your own image. We all love talking to people that feed back to us what we're thinking, and if you're not careful, that actually leads itself to mistakes on that side. The other thing is I've used psychometric testing in a number of businesses. In fact, a number of the businesses I'm involved in now do, but I've only ever used it as a means of confirming some of the thoughts and views that intuitively you may have when you've interviewed people and tested people. I've not used it as the main source, and so I think we have to be careful that we don't lose that ability to recognise that not everybody's going to do the job in the same way, and you've got to try and find out, does a uniqueness bring a particular skill that you can bring to bear. So that's another key factor.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? So where your gut feel told you something, and then the psychometrics came in and confirmed or denied it?
Yeah, it could be something as similar as like, how good is this person at communicating, and what support are they going to require in order to inform the rest of the team of what they're doing. So there may be somebody who's actually incredibly competent, but not very good at communicating what they're looking for, or where they're doing, or how they're doing. Now, that might be a situation where you say, well, actually, I think this person is going to do absolutely the job and bring that team along, but we're going to have to really support and help them to develop some of those skills. That would be one example. Another example may be that this person doesn't form relationships which are meaningful and don't have the desired requirement. Typically, they may be called a hired gun, somebody that comes in, does a job, and then is going to go on to the next.
Would that be an individual? Would that be an IC, an individual contributor, more of a lone wolf?
It could well be a senior individual contributor. Now, it may be that what you're looking for, and this is why it's important to understand the context, it may be that you're looking for somebody that is going to radically change something in a direction that you think the business or a division needs to go, and therefore you're hiring somebody that may go way beyond where you want to, but actually you're comfortable being dragged in that direction because that's the right direction you want. So therefore you're willing to put that up for that. If it's somebody, however, that's forming part of a team, that's the last thing you need. So it's about context, and it's about what skills do you require for that particular role or that particular stage a company's at.
You know what? This really grinds my gears.
For those of you familiar with this podcast, you'll know that traditionally we have one little slot where we ask our guests to tell us what's been grinding their gears in the tech industry recently. And I believe you've got something to say, Colin.
I'm most concerned about, and the thing I'm most sort of, gets me angry when I talk about the tech industry. We've talked about all these wonderful things, opportunities, all these things that are actually sort of emerging. But the context in which they're happening, which is in the UK, what does Brand UK stand for, and what is it we're going to be staking our future on? It just is unclear in terms of with tech. I really am unclear how we're going to get to this this world of ambrosia where we've got so much free time that AI is going to take over all of the challenging roles, and we're all going to have all this free time for high value. The cost of us getting there and the gap between the haves and have-nots is going to be so great that I do fear that as a country, we are literally stuck in the mid-Atlantic. We've no longer able to depend on the US as our major source of support, security, trading. We've cut ourselves off from Europe from that as well. And we do not have any clear manifest as to what we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. What our role is, our service economy, which is typically we've been, potentially is the one that's going to be the biggest impacted by AI. We no longer have a manufacturing capability of any sort of ilk. Now, we do have certain things. We mentioned education earlier on, which I think we have an opportunity as a global leader, global brand, which again, we're doing our best to not support. So that's what worries me. I think as a country, our importance and our relevance is becoming less and less, and that just worries me.
Here in Europe, we don't have the ability to scale leaders. You talked about being sort of like sponge-like in picking up skills, the balance between being a chairman, a NED, and an executor. But why do you think even those European companies that are truly capable of category leadership, I'm thinking of some of the guys right now like Mistral perhaps and Agora out of the Nordics, we've had Hussein on here, maybe his company Quench will be one of those. But why do you believe it's true that we just cannot scale European category leaders, or do you think that's somewhat of a myth?
It is an incredibly difficult thing for European category leaders to continue to scale. I mean, the whole tech industry is one where consolidation just plays constantly, and the degree at which that consolidation now occurs is such that we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of consolidation plays, whereas 20 years ago it was hundreds of billions, hundreds of millions, and before that tens of millions. And the challenge we have is twofold. First of all, historically, Europe does not have a track record of serial CEOs. We have a situation where we have CEOs building businesses, build it to a certain level, sell out, and then become investors and or non-execs. We do not have the same environment where multiple serial people are building businesses. Now that is changing. So that was historically where we were. We're now at a point where we can identify European businesses that are spinning up new ideas, new businesses at rates, particularly at the scale-up size. We're seeing more and more coming out of scale-up businesses. But there is this inevitable drive towards consolidation, and it's a very tough decision for somebody to make when they turn around and say, actually, I'm turning down this fantastic financial offer in order to just continue to scale my business. It's not something that a lot of people do. The other thing that is happening is the source of that consolidation is changing as well. We look to the US. The US traditionally has always been able to pay higher multiples for European businesses than European public markets or investment. That typically is the way it's always worked. And there's a symbiotic relationship there, because American businesses also recognize that actually scaling in Europe, multiple countries, is tough. And so the symbiosis works there. Highly financed, source of capital, ability to get into a large marketplace, which is difficult, notoriously difficult to crack. European businesses are good at that, etc., etc. What we're now starting, I think, increasingly to see is new sources of income also coming in. Middle East, for instance, I think the Middle East ambition, Far East, we're seeing domestic growth in India, China, etc., where people are recognizing that they can scale very rapidly, again, by making those moves. So European businesses are in an interesting position, because in the past we always looked west towards the US. I think the sources are now coming from literally all around the globe, potentially to mop up great technology, great ideas at good valuations, and that's a tough thing for shareholders and management to hold out for in order to continue to scale.
Some people are saying that there is an opportunity now that we may be able to scale faster before any eventual consolidation, because AI will allow us to scale companies fast with relatively few people. And does that to an extent level the playing field and brings in opportunities for people that would previously be considered regional players to move forward very, very quickly?
I think we're moving into the scenario where it's about how established companies are using AI to innovate and move their businesses forward. That, I think, is an area where there's going to be immense demands for skills and examples. So I do think that opens up a whole new area where people are going to be looking and saying, actually, it's not about pure AI, it's about the application of that AI in established businesses, which potentially is going to be the biggest growth area. So could we be category leaders in that? Yeah, I think possibly so. The difference here, though, is the pace at which this is changing is fundamentally different to anything else we've ever seen before. This isn't something where people can sit on their hands, really waiting to see, is it going to happen? They're going to have to be some very big bets, and in those bets there'll be winners and there'll be a lot of losers.
Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about category design, head to becategorical.com. If you need help designing and dominating your category, then get in touch. Contact details are in the show notes.
Are you still developing separate marketing plans for each of your different channels to market? Can you really sanction messages reaching the same customers from unconnected targets? Listen, it's now the AI age. Things need to change. Positive is a different sort of AI-powered agency. From our very beginning, we've integrated marketing communications from PR to events, social to paid ads. Working smarter means working integrated. Let us show you what a truly joined-up strategy could do for your tech business. Contact Positive today with an email to hello@positivemarketing.com.